Afternoon, everyone. My name is Jill Danello. I'm the manager of educational programs at Green Education US. Green Education offers professional training and certification for resource recovery professionals and others interested in developing the professional skills to run sustainability programs. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of curbside composting programs. And leading us off will be Georgia Marks. Georgia is the business process specialist with Austin Resource Recovery. Georgia leads the community's environmental sustainability programs and is instrumental in helping the city reach its zero waste goals. Joining Georgia is Amy Slagle. Amy is the division manager with the Austin Resource Recovery. She currently manages various programs related to compost, litter, and homelessness issues. With over 20 years of experience in the waste management field, we're going to rely on Amy to answer a lot of the questions that will come out for when the boots hit the ground in doing these implementations. And then we'll be closing out today's webinar with Rob Watson of the Sweep Standard. Rob, of course, is the founder of the Sweep Standard and promises to bring to the solid waste industry a third-party certification program that will bring integrity, measurement, and accountability to our industry. Rob is best known as the founding father of LEED, the largest and fastest growing international green building standard. And we feel fortunate that he is bringing that expertise to solid waste. The Sweep Standard is a comprehensive framework for local governments and businesses designed to optimize waste management and promote continuous improvement towards zero waste. If you'd like more information, again, you can see the previously recorded webinars on our websites, or better yet, just send us a note in chat and we'd be happy to connect with you to provide more information after today's webinar. Finally, Sam Yeoman and Will Zirier are Sweep Standard Program Managers. They will be behind the scenes answering your questions, moderating the chat, and then joining us for discussion after the formal presentations. The webinar is being recorded. It will be available early next week to share with your colleagues who are not able to join us here today. We will also share a link to the presentation decks in the chat towards the end of the webinar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Georgia, and as Jill said, I'm a business process specialist with Austin Resource Recovery. I work in operations, and my primary roles involve project management, process improvement, and research. Joining me, as she said, is Amy Slagle. She's our litter abatement division manager, and she oversees a very diverse roster of services within our department, including litter control, free cleaning, curbside composting, bulk collection and brush collection programs. And as Jill said, she'll be here to help us answer some of your more in-detailed questions. So today we are going to be talking about ARR's curbside compost program. I'm going to kind of walk you through why we started it, how we planned out our expansions and how those were rolled out, the effects that it had on our desired outcomes, some lessons we learned, and we'll answer any questions you may have once we wrap up. One thing I think it's important for everyone to note as we walk through this presentation is that this program does cover all compostable materials for residential customers within the city of Austin. So it's both yard trimmings and food waste are included within this program. So this is our program timeline. Our curbside composting program started with a pilot of 14,000 residential customers in 2012. And the initial pilot was launched utilizing already existing yard trimmings routes within our litter abatement division. We've done several expansions, as you can see, over the last few years, discounting 2020 because, of course, the 2020 pandemic kind of delayed a lot of things across the country, and it included our last expansion of the composting program. So we expanded in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2021, and currently the program covers 203,000 residential customers, which is the majority, which is all of our customer base within the city of Austin that we service. The compost program expanded on the yard trimming routes that were already in existence. And those routes were then updated during the expansion process to accommodate the updated needs of the program. And at this point, the yard trimmings program does not exist separately from compost collection. And internally, we coined the term organics to kind of describe both, but officially it is called our Curbside Compost program, but it does include our old yard trimmings program. So why did we decide to start a composting program in the first place? I think a lot of what I have to tell you about the strategic direction of the City of Austin will probably ring really familiar to all of you from your local communities. But ARR's Curbside Composting program was developed to help us reach our zero waste goals. In 2011, before the start of the 2012 pilot program, compostable materials were the largest fraction of the discard stream disposed of in the landfill here in Austin at 46%, which was a large percentage. The 2011 Zero Waste Master Plan aims to have Austin divert 90% of materials from the landfill by 2040. The compost pilot was started as a way to test the viability of curbside compost for the city and to help us increase our diversion rates. The pilot went off well, and thus we have kept the program and expanded it in the last few years. As of 2015, we had a 42% diversion rate overall, and we expect that this measure will be updated soon. Again, it was delayed because of the pandemic. We haven't been able to get all of the data that we need for that yet, but the city's new strategic direction 23 has continued the city's trend of listing sustainability and resilience as a main strategic anchor for the city as a whole, and it directs us to continue to invest in programs that align with the long-term environmental policy goals detailed in the Zero Waste Master Plan that was developed in 2011. And we are in the process of updating our master plan, but we are feeling confident that we'll be able to continue to increase our diversion rate as we move forward. So some desired outcomes for the program. There were 4 main desired outcomes for the implementation of the curbside composting program. First and foremost, to increase the tons of yard trimmings and compostable materials that were collected from residences within the city of Austin. Second, to increase the compost program's participation rates. Third, to maintain a low contamination rate within the compostable materials that are collected. And 4, to divert materials from the landfill to increase our diversion rate overall. So this first chart that you are seeing now depicts the total weight in tons of both yard trimmings and composting collected through the Curbside Compost program between 2015 and 2020. You'll note that there's been a 63% increase in tons collected during these 5 years. Of course, most of this increase can be linked to the fact that the number of residents in the program has increased as the program was expanding. However, we do tie this chart to our first desired income of increasing the tons of yard trimmings and compostable materials collected. And it helps us keep in mind how the program has progressed over time, as well as to better understand how future collections can help us to maintain and increase participation rates among our community and get more people involved in curbside composting. So the next few slides detail our set out and contamination rate progress between 2018 and 2020. Some of the data was actually, let me correct that. Some of the data was actually collected in November of 2017. So between the end of 2017 and 2020. So between November 2017 and January 18, our quality assurance team within Austin Resource Recovery conducted a compost set out and characterization study to determine customers' participation in our curbside composting program and what materials were being discarded. The assessment covered all 39 of the composting routes that were in operation at the time, And the assessment found a 27.4% average set-out rate, which measured well against other cities in Texas, but below the goal set for Austin within the Zero Waste Master Plan. And we are still working, of course, to increase that participation. Between January 2018 and March 2018, 36 of the 39 routes were assessed using a standard sorting model and found a 2% contamination rate. This was lower than San Francisco and San Antonio programs at the time, which had an average rate of about 5%. And this data can be assessed with about a 95% confidence rating. So we're happy with the contamination rate at this stage, but we do still need more people to participate in the program. At this time, there were 65 trash collection routes within the curbside compost routes that we were assessing. 42 of those 65 routes had a decrease in collection weight, which is a decrease of about 7% in trash collected. We can't say that 7% is caused by the implementation of our curbside program, but we do think that there is a correlation between the decrease in that and other options. The next three slides detail a similar set out and characterization study that we did the next year to look at changes that may have happened in the program. So between November 18 and January 19, the quality assurance team again conducted a compost set out and characterization study to determine customer participation in our curbside composting program and what materials were discarded. The assessment covered all 40 current composting routes at the time. The assessment found a 28.9% average set out rate, which again measured well against other cities in Texas, but below our final goal. However, you'll note that it is higher than the 27.4% average set out rate that we had measured the year before. This assessment also came directly after that. We did an assessment on contamination and characterization. So in August of 18, 54 of the 67 routes were assessed using a standard sorting model, and we found a 2.5% contamination rate. This data was assessed with a 90% confidence level, and it is 0.5% higher than the contamination rate that we had found the year before. So while our participation increased, the contamination rate also increased. We're unsure if those are related. And then during this time, we also reassessed the trash routes within those same composting routes, and we saw a 7.7% decrease in trash diversion. However, again, we cannot say that is a causation, only a correlation. So in 2020, we had to change things up a little bit. The curbside composting program analysis was held, but due to the pandemic, only a characterization study was conducted and over a much smaller sample size of routes. So 30 out of then 107 organics routes were audited with an 87% confidence level, and this showed a 1% contamination rate. A set out study was not conducted for the year because of the pandemic, but we were happy with the contamination rate that we received, even with the smaller sample size. So that's a little bit about how our program has performed over the last few years. The next thing that we would like to touch base on are just some lessons learned. These are things that we've learned over the course of the program expansion, and that we feel are things that we would recommend anybody considering as best practices if they're interested in expanding or starting a program. During the initial implementation and subsequent expansions of the curbside composting program, we had 5 main lessons learned. First and foremost, we went from a 96-gallon cart in the first pilot program to a 32-gallon cart in phase 1 of the expansion, because we noticed that many customers were not filling their carts each week. The change to the smaller cart meant that we had a significant cost savings with the expansions, which was advantageous. Second, we doubled the number of open house events in the expansions. Our public information team found that the events were really popular. We quickly learned that more were needed to allow enough time for people to ask questions, to watch videos, and to get the free kitchen collectors without extremely long lines or wait times. We also increased the number of staff at each event and decreased the number of information stations at each event to help things run more smoothly. During the first 2 expansions, we attempted to deliver educational materials with our carts, and we found that there were several obstacles to accomplishing this well. This included weather being an issue and also contractor handling of the materials. So in the final 2 expansions, we opted to mail all of our educational materials in one large envelope to the customers. This increased our costs fairly significantly, but it also increased the likelihood that our customers would receive the information dry and intact. And we also realized that we needed to inflate the overall timeline to produce those materials because of the change in how they were being sent out. And we needed to give print vendors more time to package materials and get them addressed correctly before delivering them to the post office. And then lastly, we added language to our print materials that set expectations for the open house events and included a limit of 1 free kitchen collector and added resources to make sure that interpretation needs were met at each event. And with each year, we learned more about our customers' needed level of digital communication, what were the best ways to advertise for events, how we should provide information on what can be composted, and in last year, how to move to virtual events because of the pandemic. So for phase 3, we added event details to our website to help open house attendees better understand parking, event flow, what to expect from the open house. And in phase 4, we created an entirely online composting guide that allows the viewer to jump to information that they wish to see and provides all of the information that was contained in the printed materials as well. And then we held virtual town halls inviting phase 4 customers to learn about the new service from the convenience and safety of their own home because of the pandemic. The last big lesson that we learned really was about the need for staggered service date starts. The staggered service date allowed more time for cart delivery, and it also prevented customers having to wait really long times after their cart had been delivered before their service started. And so that those are our 5 main lessons learned from the program. I know this has been a quick presentation about our implementation and how it's worked and the lessons learned, but we wanted to allow a lot of time for questions that people may have about the logistics of how this was all handled on the implementation side and specifically on the operations side. So we'll open the floor now for questions.
Great, thanks, Georgia, for that. We have a bunch of questions that have come in. I guess the first one we can start with is, what does contamination really mean when you're talking about compost? What is considered contaminated compost? Is it just people placing, not the right materials in the set-out box, or is that inbound contamination, or is it contamination that happens, along the process from setting it out and from its time on the curbside to the end facility?
It's really more of an inbound contamination. And that's just customers putting in trash or recyclable materials, or even maybe bulk items within their compost cart. So that's how we view it.
Okay, great. How much of Austin's compost is certified by STA or other programs?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. We have a private contractor that processes all of our curbside compost and food waste materials. So that'd be a good question for me to check with them on. But I know they do process it and sell it to customers around Austin.
Okay, great. Did the collection carts require any special specifications to accommodate food scrap collections?
No, we use just normal 32-gallon carts that were also used for trash. They're just green for compost. So we did offer kitchen collectors for folks to be able to use it in their home, but everything else is just a normal trash cart.
Okay. And someone asked, do I understand correctly that food scraps were collected together with yard trimmings?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great. Was that 7.7% decrease that was mentioned since the 2018 study, or was it a decrease from the same year that 2018 was compared to?
I think it was go ahead, Georgia.
I was going to say it was a 0.7 increase from the year before.
Okay. Let's see. What adjustments / additional equipment had to be made or purchased to upgrade from yard waste to compost collection, and how expensive was that?
That's typically when we were just collecting yard trimmings, we were able to utilize a rear loader vehicle, which can run around $300,000 depending on model and then capacity as well. So with the addition of food waste, we looked at adding. We actually purchased a type of vehicle that's called a multi-pack that it allows for automated collection as well as a rear loader collection as well, and that way we could ideally only have one person on the truck. It helps with staffing as well as overall cost in your budget. But the multi-pack trucks tend to run between $450,000 and $500,000. So, and with the price of metal having gone up over the last few years, I think the last count, it was right around $483,000 for one vehicle. And they also come with a little bit more maintenance costs because you've got two different types of equipment technically on one truck, and your automated trucks are a lot more of a maintenance item than your rear loader vehicles typically.
Okay, cool. Were there any space issues raised regarding the carts?
I would say yes. In some of our older, more compact parts of town, 3 carts is a challenge for keeping it in your garage or even on the side of your house. And that was also one of the reasons we ended up moving from the 96-gallon to the 32-gallon, where there's complaints about how much space a 96-gallon cart took up. So.
Okay. And staying on the same topic of complaints, were there widespread complaints about, you have food waste out on the curbside, in the hot Austin sun, are there complaints about smells and maggots and the such?
We do get those from time to time. We encourage customers to use the biodegradable bags. In fact, when we first started the pilot, biodegradable bags were not part of the program. And that was a requirement for us with our new contract, was to have the processor accept biodegradable bags to help customers with that ick factor. So it is hot here, and the garbage gets icky and smelly and full of maggots as much as the compost does. So, but it is something I think you just over time people adjust to.
Gotcha. Have you experimented with subscription-based community drop-off locations? And if so, do you use a lock system, and what type of lock system if you do?
That's not something the city of Austin has. Everything is curbside based. We don't have any drop-off services or at least for compost.
Okay. What does the city use the end compost for? Does all the compost stay in the city?
So a contractor sells it. Customers can go and buy it. So it can be used in gardens or flower beds. I don't know that it all stays in Austin. I would imagine that there are folks who may pick up some in the surrounding communities and use it there as well.
Gotcha. I think that is most, if not all of them. Thanks so much for responding to those. Um, and Rob, I guess you can start sharing your screen and start your portion. Oh, we have one more question, actually, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Do the biodegradable bags actually break down sufficiently to compost, or are they screened out as a contaminant?
The contractor is able to include them in their static piles or in their windrows, and they break down. It's not screened out as a contaminant.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. Rob, I'll kick it over to you.
Okay, great presentation. Thank you so much, Amy and Georgia. Really appreciate you taking the time out to share your experience with this. I'm going to sort of go a little bit more abstract and talk about SWEEP itself. And that will just provide a little bit of background on the standard for those of you who are not familiar with it. I'll be very quick so that I don't bore the folks that are familiar with it. And so basically, you know, taking from the experience that through 12 years wandering in the Sinai regarding figuring out the Green Building Standard LEED, I learned a lot about standard setting, expert involvement, et cetera. And when I was invited to start looking at the waste industry, I realized that even though it had been at the core of the environmental canon for about 50 years, I mean, one of the key things that got me into this business, right out of college was, or even, got me interested, was the crying Indian. I'm sort of dating myself a little bit, but those of you who are have a little bit of gray will understand what I'm talking about. And so, waste and litter, my first job in the 6th grade was helping people unpack their drop-off recyclables in a small town in California. So thought that we needed to move into out of the 1970s into the 21st century, move our linear take-make waste waste processing system into a more circular, a more comprehensive sustainable materials management perspective. So we've created a suite of triple bottom line sustainable materials management standards. We are in the process of creating the suite. We have one standard out now. And our focus is local governments and the materials management industries that supply services to local governments across the whole waste handling aspect. And we're trying to integrate policy, data, and the operations in a more cohesive and integrated fashion. Similar to LEED, the purpose of SWEEP is to identify and reward leaders in sustainable materials management. And a lot of folks think that they're doing great by themselves, and they are doing great. But when you have a third-party independent recognition for those efforts, it has way more credibility than simply tooting your own horn or have your friends toot it for you. And so what we tried to do is create a series of arm's length evaluation metrics and use those to basically define what the top quartile of performance is right now, and then we will go into other aspects of the market. You look at 10 waste characterization studies and you'll find 10 different characterizations of the same piece of discarded material, and you'll find 10 different ways of defining success. And so what we're trying to do is to create a standardized basis for terms in the waste management industry. The old adage is you can't manage what you don't measure. So we certainly encourage people to measure, and we reward people for it. But you also can't measure what you haven't defined, or your measurements don't have any meaning if the definitions are inconsistent. And so having a set of consistent definitions, a set of consistent calculations will help us be able to understand really what is working and what is not just in one jurisdictions, but between jurisdictions and indeed across the entire country. And so, because it's easy, because it's simple, and because people understand it, we're using a point-based system similar to LEED, with the exception of the Sweep Zero standard, which I'll talk about in a second, which is pass-fail. So you're either zero or you're not. But all of these standards are going to be working together, and we're working with all facets of the industry to transform the market and lead us on a more sustainable path. So basically, SWEEP has 5 main categories and then a bonus category. First, we start with policy, and sustainable materials management policy is the foundation of sort of right action. It's the statement of intent. You don't actually have to do anything to get all of the points here. We give this a lot of credit initially because we're coming out of the box with a brand new standard. So we want to give people a chance to get a lot of credit for saying they're going to do something. But as we move on, we're going to give more and more credit for actually doing something as opposed to saying you're going to do something. Sort of consistent with the manage, measure, define element that I just discussed. Waste generation and prevention is about not only preventing waste and looking at source reduction programs, which we'll be talking a lot about in the context of organics, but also measuring that data and reporting it and involving people in the decision making. So we're trying to take a real triple bottom line approach, looking at environment, economics, and people. And then we get into the instrumentalities of the system. So we look at solid waste collection and all the things that make that economic and environmentally performing, as well as safe. And then post-collection recovery, not surprisingly, for an environmentally oriented standard, you get the most points in this area for improving your diversion rate or decreasing your disposal rate. And then finally, we look at the proper management of disposal facilities. So let me be super, super clear. You don't get any points for throwing things away. You get points for managing your disposal systems in an environmental, safe, and good neighborly way. So that's what all the credits there are focused on. And by contrast with post-collection recovery, you get credit for high quality materials, you get credit for higher diversion rates, as well as safe operation of your MRFs and your composting facilities, et cetera. And then the bonus points are just for exemplary performance, things that we haven't thought of, things that might be experimental or really, really expensive that we don't want this to be a gold-plated standard, and may need a little bit more market development time before it becomes more accessible. So I've talked about, the top quartile, which is Sweep Plus, and that's the standard that is currently released right now. We will be working on the Sweep Zero standard, which is sort of a bleeding edge standard next. And then, and both of those standards will be, have been formed or will be formed using a process developed by an ANSI accredited standard setting organization. So while Sweep Plus is not an American national standard, it's been developed according to guidelines by an ANSI accredited standard setting organization. Therefore, it can be used as an underwriting standard. It can be used for reference in ordinances, et cetera. Because Sweep itself will be a mid-market standard, we're going to try and see if we can't do an American national standard fully consensus process for that, because it's addressing a large part of the market, and because the ANS process is trying to set best average practice, and the other standards are more leadership standards, which are not really designed for the American national standards process. So if I had to sort of summarize what Sweep is really focusing on, it is that prevention element. And while Sweep focuses on the reduction part, that third R, that recycling part, we're really trying to focus on reduce and reuse more. And that's clearly consistent with the EPA's food recovery hierarchy. And there's a lot of reason for that. Research done by the state of Oregon showed that using WARM, if you reduce a ton of food waste, it has 6 to 7 times the climate impact that either composting or anaerobically digesting that material has. And for that reason, SWEEP gives a lot of credit for reducing food waste as opposed to composting or we do give some credit for anaerobically digesting, but there are several credits where that food waste reduction will give you credit. So the thing that we don't really talk about is the expense of collecting all of these things, whether it's recycling or food waste. I've looked at food waste programs that cost well over $250 to $300 a ton to process and collect, whereas waste itself is half that or less. And the recycling numbers are not much better when you consider the collection costs in that. And that's one of the reasons we ask people to share their costs in SWEEP. But looking at an overview of organics in the U.S. Over the last 50 years, food waste per capita has tripled from 125 pounds discarded per person per year to almost 400. So these are 2018 numbers. Who knows what the pandemic made it? But we're almost at 300. We're almost at 400 pounds per person per year just of food waste. You've heard the statistic that 40% of food is wasted. Not only is that an economic travesty, it's a moral travesty as well. Yard waste basically has stayed flat, within 5 or 10 pounds of that 220 number. So it's, kind of, staying pat in terms of generation. Food and organics are the primary source of methane emissions. Plus, they are if they are decomposing aerobically, they're producing carbon dioxide. And standard compost produces a shocking amount of methane, even in decently managed piles. So certainly something from a climate change perspective that we need to be careful about. Better than sticking in a landfill, but compost piles, they're particularly at the industrial level. These are big industrial facilities. They require large diesel belching machines in many cases, and again, it's not pitchforks and overalls and chicken wire. So we need to understand that these are industrial processes, industrial facilities, and they need to be managed like that. So in SWEEP itself, there are at least 4 categories where there are organics related credits. I'm careful to say that with some exceptions, this is not true, but in general, managing organics properly contribute 2 points and don't earn all of the points. Although again, there are some credits where that's true. In the policy arena, we have 3 credits, but a lot of points, particularly looking at the performance pathway in the comprehensive policy credit, which I'll get to in a second. A couple of credits and 6 points in waste generation prevention, a couple of credits and up to 4 points in solid waste collection, and 1 prerequisite and 3 credits in the post-collection recovery category and up to 6 points. So overall, about 20% of the credits, 1 prerequisite, and 40% of the points are contributed to by an organics, a comprehensive organics program. So, SWEEP takes this very seriously as an important strategy for sustainable materials management. So looking at the comprehensive sustainable materials management policy question, the goal is to look more comprehensively at waste rather than in a piecemeal fashion. The basic strategy here is to do an analysis, either an LCA analysis or a WARM analysis, which is the EPA's model, to find the materials that have the biggest impact. And then, and obviously WARM is just an energy and climate model, whereas a life cycle assessment would look at water, would look at human health, would look at a number of other issues. And that's why we give a lot more points for it. But even looking at the impacts of the materiality of it and what's being discarded from a metric other than tons is what we're trying to get at here. So, tons are important. They're a necessary evil. But the fact is that, a ton does not tell you anything about the economic or social impact of that material. A ton of aluminum or compared to a ton of even glass, right? I mean, a ton of textiles has about 100 times the environmental footprint of a ton of glass, right? And yet we don't collect textiles curbside by and large, but we do collect glass. There are some curbside collection things, but it's not the kind of thing that goes into a single stream or other thing. And so what we're trying to do with sweep is figure out other metrics that we can use so that we can rationalize both from an economic and an environmental perspective the sustainability of the system. And so the metric for this particular credit is disposal per capita. So this really encourages you to look upstream as opposed to downstream, because source reduction will get you a lot of points in this. And as the Oregon study showed, you get a lot more bang for the buck from an environmental perspective, and even economically. They found that the economic value of a ton of food waste rescued is about $5,000. But if you anaerobically digest a ton of food waste, you're lucky if you can get $50 worth of energy from it. And so, clearly we're trying to, make these things more known and have them be used to make policy decisions. So getting into waste characterization and generation, again, that generation note, that generation piece, tracking it, figuring out how much materials are produced by each person, that's getting at things that you can manage and measure and then control. And so looking at organics as an important piece of that will be something that organics contribute point-wise. And then looking at more advanced, we do give specific credits for programs that look at organic waste food reduction. So, you'll find that if you look closely at the standard, there are areas where you quote get double counting, or things that you get credit for in one credit will give you points in another area as well. And organics and food rescue are one of those places because of its environmental importance and because of the social importance of not wasting food. So programs, if you have a source reduction program for food, you'll get credit for it here as well as in the food source reduction credit program. And so, the whole point of source reduction programs for food is to reduce waste generation, minimize resource consumption, avoid negative impacts from toxicity and goods manufacturing, et cetera. And so waste prevention programs for MSW, for food, C&D are all the kinds of things that get you credit under this. And again, food rescue, labeling programs in supermarkets, other kinds of things will get you credit under this program. And then you can, again, double dip in this credit, the reuse and rescue programs. And this is, very focused on food, whether it's prepared food from restaurants or raw food from supermarkets, where you can either rescue it while it's still good, or if you have programs that either discount food or make people aware that there are impending the due date is coming up, and either putting them in a special section with a discount or collecting those and making them available to food pantries or other kinds of programs. So if you're a local government, and if you encourage that, if you advertise, if you support it somehow, either through tax abatements or rent abatements or any other kinds of things, those are the kinds of activities that give you credit for that in sweep. Now, you might wonder why cost transparency is in this. But the reality is that collection costs are 2/3 of the total cost of managing waste, and it seems to get lost in the conversation. So we tend to focus a lot on the tip fee, or how much money we get back from selling our recyclables. But the reality is that when you include the cost of collection, basically none of our sustainability programs pencil out. And so that further emphasizes the importance of reducing waste. But it also, I think, is going to focus us on, and should focus on, are there better ways of managing the entirety of the waste management system? Should we double down on mixed waste collection and figure out, how to separate waste more effectively and then process it closer to home, rather than, making consumers responsible for the separation, allow machines to do it, except that there might be a little bit of extra wet, dry contamination, and just design your back end facilities to handle it, rather than driving your programs to meet quality and input requirements for infrastructure that in many cases is 4 to 5 decades old. And so, we're trying to help people understand, what all the cost elements are, and collection is a very important piece of that. And then also looking at making sure that you have enough infrastructure. And again, that infrastructure could be drop off, it could be curbside, it could be just waste handling facilities on the back end. And so, having channels for organics, and this could be seen as a contradiction of the credit that I just mentioned. So not all of these credits are going to be 100% aligned, because some of the impetuses are going to be slightly different depending upon what aspect of the sustainability tripod you're going after. And so minimum diversion rate is a prerequisite. And so it's sort of the line, you must be at least this tall to ride this ride. So if you have to show that you're either diverting at least 30% of your MSW, which is just slightly below average, and again, you don't get any points for this, but at least you get to play, or demonstrate that your per capita disposal is below 6.4 pounds per day. And so that's kind of the token of entry into the program, and then your points are gathered by that. But then again, organics being over almost 40% of the material, you can't get sweep without a good organics program. So that's why, I said earlier, it contributes to credits and points, not necessarily earns them. Here's one thing though, where a specific food waste approach will get you credit. So having anaerobic digestion infrastructure, whether it is something that is built in conjunction with agricultural waste handling, or whether you decide to chop food up and stick it in your wastewater treatment plant, which is basically already a large anaerobic digester. That's up to you. Or whether you have a policy to put incinerators in all of your things and use the sewage system to convey your food organics to your wastewater treatment plant. Again, that could theoretically qualify for this credit. And then, again, I've gotten on my soapbox about cost, and we do this for all of the different methods of recovering materials as well. So we invite you, if some of this is intriguing you, enraging you, stimulating you, please get involved with us. We have a terrific website, sweepstandard.org. You can become a member. It's very inexpensive for local governments and modestly expensive for private businesses. You can join our committees as members. And we are also in the pilot phase, and we still have a couple of slots open for pilot programs. We're looking diversity both geographically as well as in terms of size, small, medium, large. And we welcome any private companies that work on the whole vertically integrated piece of waste management, or a sliver. So looking forward to your questions, and thanks for thanks for attending and thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Rob. We got a couple questions that just came in for you. One is, how many companies provide their data roughly?
So we are just getting out of the box, and we are trying to make the data collection piece of it as painless as possible. We've partnered with Retract Connect and Emerge Knowledge, which do the municipal measurement program platform. We will be further integrating with that over time. So, I mean, the short answer is 0, right? We don't have any concrete data yet. We have about a dozen pilots, both from the private sector and local governments. And as soon as those folks put their data into our system, we will have it. Obviously, because of privacy reasons and stuff like that, we will probably end up aggregating it. But if some communities want to be out front with their actual data, we will be publishing it in case studies and that sort of thing. But it really will be up to the pilot participants and the sweep certification participants, how much of their data they want to share.
Great. Next question is, why emphasize sorting by equipment? That undercuts economic savings going to generators when they reduce, reuse, and recycle more.
So I'm not sure I understand the basic thrust. I mean, I was talking with a property owner in San Francisco who has a very large building, and they have to spend $100,000 a year to have somebody sort their waste on site. So going to mixed waste sorting for them, I'll just be conservative right off the bat and say we'll save them $50,000. And so I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question. I would say the biggest negative of mixed waste sorting right now is that there's a little bit of, like I said, wet, dry contamination. A little bit more fiber might be contaminated, but the fact of the matter is that 40% of the fiber ends up in the waste stream anyway, and it's not captured. It's in the black bin. It's not captured. And if you sort it mechanically, some extra might go into the composting facility, but we're going to end up getting a lot more fiber that way than you can design paper facilities to handle a little bit of extra contamination, right? You find some places where pizza boxes are fine, other places where pizza boxes are no-goes, and that's all based on the off-takers of that material. And generally the ones that can't handle it are the ones that have legacy older facilities and are just not modern. And so what we want to do is create a modern material processing infrastructure that can handle waste. Let people focus their bandwidth on reduction and reuse rather than on recycling. Let the machines do the recycling. They do it better, because no human being, without looking and taking 5 minutes to figure out the difference between a PP red Tide bottle and a red All bottle, that might be HDPE, right? But machines can do that instantaneously. So there are a lot of advantages to doing it that way, using density dimension optical properties and separating it.
Great, thanks for that, Rob. This is actually a question going back to Georgia and Amy's presentation. Georgia, was Austin's youth tapped into at all when rolling out the curbside collection program, or was that incorporated into the strategy in your thinking, or do you plan to engage youth in the education for curbside composting?
This may be a better question for Amy. I am not aware of any way that we engaged youth. I did work some with our PIO team as we were talking about this presentation, but this may be something that I'd have to get back with someone about.
Okay. And one last question, hopefully maybe you can answer this one. We have city curbside for leaf and limb and collection sites for all kitchen scraps, including meats/oils. We also have commercial curbside for vegetative kitchen scraps by a small business that actually was able to survive the pandemic. What insights do you have for cities or small businesses and the competition that may result?
Well, I'm assuming they mean competition between vendors. I don't know that we've had a ton of issue with that. So the contractor that we utilize for our curbside program would have been chosen through, like the contract would have been chosen and set up through a solicitation process done by our central purchasing office and our contracts division here within the department. So any competition would have been handled at that level between the different vendors, and the contractor that was chosen would have been chosen based on how well they fit the needs within the scope of work that they were given to bid on.
Awesome.
And from a sweep perspective, the good news is that whether you're spending, whether you're collecting on a $400 bicycle or $400,000 split unit truck, supporting and encouraging that type of ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem, is creditable under sweep. We're in the experimental phase right now. We're trying to let 1,000 flowers bloom and figure out, what makes sense both economically and ecologically. So we're trying to, encourage, infrastructure of all types and processing programs of all types with sweep.
I agree with that. And the other thing that I'll add is that the city does encourage small businesses, and particularly small businesses run by people of color within the community, to participate as much as possible in any bidding for contracts that become available. But I am again not best posed to talk about what the process for choosing that vendor may have been like. That was before my time with the department.
Understood. Well, thanks so much. That does it for our questions. Just a big thanks to the panelists again. Really interesting stuff. And thanks to all the attendees for attending. And if you have any questions, please reach out to the sweep team and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.